When a pregnant black woman is assaulted in America, she faces one of the most dangerous realities in our society. Homicide becomes a leading cause of her death. But what happens when her attacker discovers she's connected to one of the world's most structured criminal enterprises? This is about a slap in a restaurant that crossed into a world where violence meets organized power. To understand what follows, you need to grasp two terrifying realities. The first is the epidemic of violence against pregnant black women, where homicide becomes a leading cause of death. The second is the silent, structured world of the Yakuza, a criminal empire built on loyalty and retaliation. This is where a single moment of public violence collides with a private web of power, and the man who started it has no idea what's coming. Let's start with the woman at the center. Her name is Keisha. At 28, she was navigating a high-risk pregnancy alone, a reality for nearly half of all black women who will face intimate partner violence in their lifetimes. Her ex, Marcus, saw the pregnancy not as a life, but as a claim, a form of control. Studies show abuse often starts or intensifies during pregnancy, and for Keisha, the manipulation had turned to threats, then to stalking. She had finally left, changed her number, and moved across the city, but he found her. He always found her. Now meet the other force in this equation. Not a person, but an institution, the Yakuza. To call it a gang is to misunderstand it entirely. It is a Ninkyo Dantai, a chivalrous organization. It operates with a strict code, a multi-layered hierarchy of Oyabun and Kobun, pseudo-parents and pseudo-children. It runs legitimate businesses, restaurants, trucking companies, talent agencies, right alongside its gambling, smuggling, and protection rackets. It has an estimated 102,000 members. And for generations, it has built its power on two pillars: absolute loyalty and brutal retaliation for disrespect. Keisha's new husband, Kenji, was not a foot soldier. He was an Oyabun, a family head within one of the three major syndicates. His world was one of precise rituals, the ceremonial sake exchange, the severed fingertips offered as apology, the full-body tattoos that mapped a lifetime of allegiance. His power was quiet, woven into the fabric of neon-lit streets and corporate boardrooms. He provided stability, protection, and a fierce, private love that Keisha had never known. To him, her pregnancy was a sacred lineage, his heir. Marcus lived in a different world, one of impulsive anger, of public performance. His violence was hot, messy, and personal. He had no concept of the cold, calculated machinery he was about to trigger. On that Saturday afternoon, he saw Keisha sitting in a booth at a mid-tier restaurant, a place she used to love. He saw her visibly pregnant. He saw her not alone, but he didn't see the man she was with. Kenji had just stepped away to take a call concerning a delicate matter of territorial respect with a rival group. This is the moment before the collision. Keisha, 7 months pregnant, feeling her child kick. Marcus, fueled by possessive rage, approaching her table. And Kenji, outside, speaking in low, deliberate Japanese, settling a dispute that would have ended in bloodshed for anyone else. The restaurant hummed with normalcy. Silverware clinked. None of the other patrons knew they were sitting in a fuse box. Marcus reached the table. The exchange was short. He called her names. He demanded to know who the father was. He told her she was making a mistake. Keisha, exhausted, terrified, but finally resolved, told him to leave, to never contact her again. That's when he leaned over the table, and he slapped her. The sound wasn't loud, but it was sharp, a crack that cut through the ambient noise. Her head snapped to the side. For a second, there was just stunned silence. Then a collective gasp. A server dropped a menu. Keisha's hand went to her cheek, her eyes wide not with pain, but with a dawning, horrific understanding. She wasn't looking at Marcus. She was looking past him to the restaurant's entrance. Kenji stood there. The phone was still in his hand, but it was lowered. His expression had drained of all the mildness he showed the world. It was a face made of stone. He had seen everything. He did not rush. He did not yell. He ended his call, placed the phone in his pocket, and began walking toward the table. Each step was measured. This was the violation of his wife, the mother of his child, in a public space. In his culture, in his world, this was not a crime of passion. It was a declaration of war. It was an unforgivable insult to his entire family. Marcus, finally sensing a shift in the atmosphere, turned. He saw a well-dosed man in a tailored suit approaching. He puffed out his chest. "This is a private conversation," he said. Kenji did not even glance at him. His eyes were fixed on Keisha, checking her, assessing the damage. He reached the table, placed a hand gently on her shoulder, and only then did he look at Marcus. "You struck my wife," Kenji said, his voice so calm it was colder than any shout. Marcus laughed, a nervous, bravado-filled sound. "Your wife? Man, you don't know what you're getting into. This is between me and her." Kenji's head tilted just a fraction. It was the look a chess master gives a piece before removing it from the board. "No," he said quietly, "it is between you and me now." He reached into his inner jacket pocket. Marcus flinched, perhaps expecting a weapon. Instead, Kenji pulled out a simple, embossed business card. He held it out, not with a flick, but with a deliberate, almost ceremonial extension of his arm. Marcus, confused, took it. The card was heavy, premium stock. It had no company name, no job title, just a name, Kenji Tanaka, and below it a single line, a specific district in Tokyo. To anyone else, it meant nothing. To anyone in the underworld of Asia, it was a beacon. It was an address. It was a statement of affiliation so clear it required no other text. "What is this?" Marcus sneered, flipping the card over. The back was blank. "Your first and only warning," Kenji said. He helped Keisha to her feet, his arm around her protectively. He looked at Marcus one last time. "Go home, wait. Someone will come to explain the price of your mistake." Then he led Keisha out of the restaurant, leaving Marcus standing there, holding a piece of paper that felt suddenly, inexplicably heavy. Marcus stood in the emptied silence of his own making. The other diners looked away, suddenly very interested in their meals. The manager hovered nervously but said nothing. The card in Marcus's hand seemed to pulse with a silent threat he couldn't articulate. He had expected a fight. He had expected shouting, maybe a scuffle with a new boyfriend. He had not expected this chilling, formal quiet. He looked at the card again. The name, the district. A slow, cold drip of fear began in his stomach. He had wanted to make a point, to reclaim what he thought was his, but he had just addressed a letter to a power he didn't comprehend, and the stamp on the reply would not be a return slap. It would be an annihilation, and he had no idea that the process had already begun the moment his hand made contact with her face. The machinery was in motion. The machinery Kenji referred to wasn't metaphorical. It began with a single phone call, not a threat but an inquiry. Before Marcus had even left the restaurant parking lot, a man named Sato, one of Kenji's senior Koban, was on the phone with a contact in the city's business licensing bureau. The request was simple: verify the business registration for one Marcus Johnson. It was a probe, the first gentle tap on a pane of glass to see where the weaknesses were. Marcus, meanwhile, drove home in a haze of defiant anger. He tossed the business card onto his dashboard. "Pretentious jerk," he muttered to himself. He convinced himself he'd scared them off, that his display of dominance had worked. He didn't understand that in Kenji's world, silence after an insult wasn't retreat. It was the quiet of a surgeon preparing tools. That night, Marcus went out with friends, bragged about putting his ex in her place, and showed them the card as a weird souvenir. One friend who had done a stint overseas went pale. "Jude," he said slowly, "that district in Tokyo, that's a Yakuza stronghold. This isn't a business card, it's a headstone." Marcus laughed it off, but a seed of doubt was planted. He Googled the name that night. The search results were curiously sparse. A few mentions in financial news articles about Asian import-export conglomerates. Nothing overt. That was the first chilling lesson. Real power doesn't scream online. While Marcus slept, Kenji was awake. In a secure, minimalist office above one of his legitimate shipping warehouses, he met with Sato and two other advisors. This was not an emotional council of war. It was a strategic assessment. The insult was profound, but the response had to be calibrated. Keisha was 7 months pregnant. Stress was a physical danger. The Centers for Disease Control notes that intimate partner violence during pregnancy triples the risk of perinatal death. Kenji's primary objective was her safety and the baby's. Retribution was secondary, but it was inevitable. The code demanded it. Disrespect unanswered would weaken his authority, invite challenges from within and without. The question was not if, but how and when. They settled on a two-pronged approach. The first prong was legal and social. Keisha, with Kenji's full support, went to the police the next morning to report the assault. For many black women, this step is fraught with barriers: fear of retaliation, distrust of the system, racist stereotypes. But Keisha now had resources and unwavering advocacy. She filed the report. Under the Unborn Victims of Violence Act, Marcus could face separate, enhanced charges for harming a fetus. In some states, that's a first-degree felony punishable by 5 to 99 years. This was the public sunlight path. The second prong operated in the shadows. Sato's initial inquiry had borne fruit. Marcus owned a small, struggling food truck. It was licensed, insured, and dependent on a contract with a local events company for most of its income. By 10 a.m. Monday, the head of that events company received a visit, not from thugs, but from a polite, well-dressed representative of Tanaka Holdings, who expressed a keen interest in becoming a major sponsor of the company's summer festival series. The sponsorship offer was generous, above market rate. There was only one small condition: they would need to review all vendor contracts to ensure brand alignment. The food truck owned by one Marcus Johnson, with its recent health code demerits, conveniently discovered, did not align. The contract was terminated by noon. Marcus received the email while applying for a new line of credit. He stared at it, the first real punch to his livelihood. Coincidence, he thought. Bad luck. Then the bank called. His line of credit application was denied. The stated reason was business instability. When he argued, the loan officer, sounding genuinely apologetic, mentioned that a significant debt had been flagged on his report, a debt Marcus was sure had been settled years ago. The old account had been bought by a collections agency just the week before, and they had immediately moved to report it. Another coincidence. The seed of doubt sprouted into a vine of anxiety. He dug the business card out of his trash. The name, Kenji Tanaka. Marcus made his first desperate move. He called Keisha. Her phone rang once, then went to a message saying the number was unavailable. He drove by her old apartment. It was vacant. She had vanished. He then did the stupidest thing he could have. He hired a private investigator. He used the last of his savings to find her, to explain, to apologize, to make it stop. The PI, a former cop, took the job. Within 48 hours, he called Marcus back, his voice tight. "I'm dropping the case, refunding your money. Listen to me carefully. You need to leave town. The people around your ex, you don't want to know, don't look for her again." The PI hung up and would not answer subsequent calls. That was when the cold fear became a solid block of ice in Marcus's chest. People don't scare off ex-cops. He tried to go about his life, but the world had developed a strange friction. His food truck's regular parking spot was suddenly deemed a no-vending zone by the city despite years of precedent. His supplier accidentally cancelled his weekly order. Then the visit. It was a Tuesday evening. A black sedan pulled up outside his apartment. Two men got out. They were not caricature gangsters. They wore suits. They moved with a quiet efficiency. They knocked on his door. When Marcus opened it, peering through the chain, the older of the two, Sato, gave a slight formal bow. "Marcus Johnson-san, a moment of your time." The politeness was more terrifying than aggression. "What do you want?" Marcus stammered. "To clarify the account," Sato said calmly, "you incurred a debt. The principal is the insult to Tanaka-sama's wife and child. The interest is the anxiety you have caused them. This debt must be settled." Sato handed a sealed envelope through the gap in the door. "These are the terms. You have 24 hours to agree. There will be no second offer." They left without another word. Inside the envelope was not a demand for money. It was a detailed, typewritten list. It required a public written apology to be published in a specific local newspaper. It required Marcus to voluntarily enroll in and complete a 52-week Batterer intervention program, with progress reports sent to a post office box. And it required him to relinquish any and all parental rights to the unborn child in perpetuity via a legally binding document prepared by their attorney. The final line read, "Compliance brings closure, resistance escalates the matter." Marcus felt the walls close in. This was not a street fight. This was a systematic dismantling. They weren't going to break his knees. They were going to own his life, his choices, his future. He couldn't go to the police. He was the one who had committed the assault. He couldn't run. They had found him effortlessly. He sat on his floor, the terms in his lap, realizing the true nature of his opponent. This was an organization that operated on a timeline of generations, with the patience of stone and the reach of a root system. He had slapped a woman, and in return he was being offered a choice between sanctioned penance and oblivion. But Marcus, cornered and fueled by a lifetime of ego, made his choice. He crumpled the paper. He wasn't going to be controlled. he was going to fight back, and in doing so, he triggered the second, irrevocable phase of the machinery. The calibrated response was over. Now, the consequences would be absolute. Marcus's defiance was a flare in the night sky, signaling his location. The calibrated pressure was replaced by a comprehensive squeeze. The first move was not against him, but around him. His closest friend, the one who had warned him about the card, received a visit. This time, the message was less polite. His friend's modest bar was subjected to a sudden, rigorous inspection by the fire marshal, the health department, and the liquor licensing board, all in the same afternoon. Violations were found. The bar was shuttered for 30 days pending corrections. The friend called Marcus, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and rage. They said this was a neighborhood safety reminder. They told me to remind you about the terms. I can't afford this, man. You need to fix this or we're done. Marcus's support system began to evaporate. Then came the digital siege. His social media accounts were flooded with a wave of bizarre, untraceable messages, not threats, but nonsense poems, quotes about honor in Japanese, links to obscure articles about Japanese corporate law. His email was inundated with spam subscriptions from every corner of the internet. His phone would ring at all hours, only to have silence on the other end. It was psychological warfare, designed to fray his nerves, to make him feel watched, which he was. A white van with tinted windows appeared parked outside his apartment for 2 days straight. It never moved. When he finally mustered the courage to approach it, he found it empty, the doors unlocked, with a single item on the driver's seat, a copy of the local newspaper, folded open to the classified section, with a circle drawn around the header for public notices, where apologies were printed. Marcus, now isolated and paranoid, decided to go on the offensive. He went to a different police precinct, trying to turn the tables. He filed a report claiming he was being stalked and harassed by a criminal organization led by Kenji Tanaka. He presented the business card as evidence. The detectives listened patiently, took notes, and told him they would look into it. What Marcus didn't know was that his report landed on the desk of a detective who had a working, albeit unofficial, relationship with certain community mediators. The detective made a call. An hour later, Marcus received a call back from the precinct. "Mr. Johnson, regarding your report, we've looked into Mr. Tanaka. He's a respected businessman with no criminal record in this country. We also pulled the report filed by his wife, Keisha Tanaka, regarding your assault. We suggest you focus on your own legal situation. A prosecutor will be in touch." The system, which he had hoped would protect him, was now aligning against him, guided by an invisible hand. The criminal summons arrived 2 days later. Assault in the 3rd degree, with a notation that the district attorney was considering enhancement charges under the Unborn Victims of Violence Act due to the victim's pregnancy. The court date was set. Marcus was now trapped in the very public legal mechanism he had feared. But the Yakuza's work was not done. They believe in balance. The legal system would handle the public crime. They would handle the private insult. Kenji, informed of Marcus's police report, gave a quiet order. The approach shifted from pressure to demonstration. Marcus woke up one morning to find his food truck, his last remaining asset, gone. Not vandalized, not stolen exactly. It had been repossessed by the leasing company for breach of contract. A clause he'd never read allowed repossession without notice if the business was involved in activity that brought the leasing company into disrepute. His public arrest record for assault was cited. The truck was sold at auction within a week to a shell company that promptly exported it to South America. Marcus was now unemployed, friendless, and facing a criminal trial. He sat in his emptying apartment, the silence deafening. This was when he made his final, catastrophic error. Desperation overrode fear. He decided if he was going down, he would take a piece of them with him. He found an old photo of Keisha from their time together. He used it to create a vile, mocking social media post, tagging what he thought were generic Japanese business accounts, hurling racist insults, and challenging Kenji directly to a fight. He posted it, and in that click, he signed his own sentence. The post was live for exactly 7 minutes. In that time, it was screenshotted and archived by 5 different unknown accounts. Then it was deleted, not by Marcus, but by the platform itself for egregious violations of our hate speech policy. But the damage was done. The insult was now digital, permanent, and racially charged. It was no longer just about a slap. It was a slander against the family's honor and their culture. This changed everything. That evening, Sato and two other men returned. There was no knock. The lock on Marcus's apartment door simply clicked open, a skill honed through necessity. They filed in. Marcus, who was on the phone with a public defender, froze. Sato walked to the computer, unplugged it, and picked it up. "Your online statement has been received," Sato said, his voice devoid of any remaining civility. "The offer is withdrawn. The debt will be collected in full." "What are you going to do?" Marcus whispered. "You will see," Sato said. "The lesson will be public, so others understand the cost of such a mistake." They left as quietly as they entered, taking his computer and his last shred of security. The next day, the public lesson began. Marcus had an interview for a job as a warehouse stocker, a humiliating step down. On his way to the interview, his car was T-boned at an intersection by a delivery truck that ran a red light. The accident was severe, totaling his car. The truck driver was apologetic, insured, and the police report clearly placed fault on him. Marcus emerged with a broken arm and bruises. A random accident, a piece of terrible luck. He spent the night in the hospital. When he was discharged, he found that his apartment landlord had initiated eviction proceedings. The building had been sold to a new management company, and they were not renewing month-to-month leases. He had 30 days to vacate. With no income, no car, and a broken arm, he was functionally homeless. The walls were not just closing in, they were grinding him to dust. Each event was legally separate, impeccably documented, and utterly devastating. This was the Yakuza method. Not a single, brutal attack, but a cascade of misfortunes that strip a person of every pillar of their life, leaving them standing alone in a hurricane. And then the final piece of the demonstration fell into place. The story, the slap, the mysterious retaliation, Marcus's spiral began to leak, not in the mainstream press, but in the undercurrents where such tales thrive. A detailed, anonymous post appeared on a forum dedicated to true crime and organized crime gossip. It laid out the entire sequence: the assault, the business card, the destroyed business, the legal case, the accident. It didn't name names, but the details were precise enough for those in certain circles to recognize the players. The post ended with a line that became its own kind of legend. "He slapped the wrong woman, and her husband didn't send flowers. He sent a lesson." The story spread through whispers in restaurant kitchens, in the backs of bars, in online communities. It became a modern fable about the dangers of unchecked ego and the hidden networks of power that exist just beneath the surface of polite society. Marcus's name became synonymous with catastrophic miscalculation. He was not a victim, he was a cautionary tale. His upcoming court date was no longer just a legal proceeding. It was to be his public shamming, the final act of the lesson. But as he sat in a homeless shelter, arm in a sling, he still had one card left to play, a desperate, dangerous card that would ignite the final confrontation and reveal the ultimate, terrifying reach of the power he had challenged. The storm was about to break, and there would be no shelter for anyone in its path. Marcus's last card was the court of public opinion. He walked into his arraignment not as a defendant, but as a self-proclaimed victim. He had contacted a local tabloid reporter, spinning a wild tale of a jealous new husband using foreign criminal connections to destroy an innocent man. He wore his sling like a badge of honor. He stood on the courthouse steps and gave an impromptu, rambling statement about unfair persecution. This was his mistake of ignorance to the end. He believed the battlefield was one of sentiment. He didn't understand that for his opponents, the courtroom was merely a stage, and the real judgment had already been passed. Inside, the proceedings were swift and brutal. The prosecutor presented the police report, witness statements from the restaurant, and medical documentation knotting Keisha's pregnancy. She then played the security footage from the restaurant. There was no sound, but the video was clear. Marcus leaning over the table, the sudden jerk of his arm, Keisha's head snapping to the side. It was undeniable. The judge, a no-nonsense woman, listened without expression. The defense, a harried public defender, tried to argue provocation and Marcus's recent string of misfortunes as evidence of coercion. The prosecutor simply stood and said, "Your Honor, the defendant's recent hardships, while unfortunate, are a civil matter. This is a criminal case of assault. We are also filing a motion to elevate the charges based on the Unborn Victims of Violence Act, given the victim was 7 months pregnant. The judge granted the motion. Marcus was now looking at a second-degree felony assault charge with a possible sentence of 2 to 20 years in a state prison. Bail was set at a figure he could never hope to afford. As the bailiffs led him away, he looked frantically around the courtroom. In the back row, he saw Sato. The man gave a single, slow nod. It was over. But the Yakuza's concept of balance required symmetry. The public insult had been answered publicly. The private debt remained. From county jail, Marcus's isolation was complete. His phone privileges yielded only disconnected numbers. No one visited. His one attempt to get a message to the outside world was intercepted. The inmate he tried to bribe turned out to be affiliated with a street gang that had a lucrative understanding with Tanaka Holdings. Marcus was moved to protective custody after an unrelated threat, which only deepened his solitude. Weeks passed. He pled guilty in a deal that promised a 5-year sentence, hoping for leniency. The night before his sentencing, he received a visitor. It was not his lawyer, it was Kenji Tanaka. They sat in a sterile visitation room, separated by glass. Kenji wore a simple, elegant suit. He showed no anger, only a calm, assessing focus. He picked up the phone. Marcus, after a moment of shock, did the same. "You came to gloat," Marcus spat. "No," Kenji said, his voice even. "I came to settle the account. The court will handle your crime. I am here for my wife's insult. You will listen." Marcus was silent. "You struck a pregnant woman, my wife, the mother of my child. You set in motion fear that could have harmed them both. This is the principle. You then refused the path of apology. You escalated. You slandered my family. This is the interest. The debt is paid in the currency you chose, your freedom, your standing, your peace, but there is a final payment." "What more do you want?" Marcus whispered, all defiance gone. "When you are released," Kenji said, "you will leave this state. You will have no contact, directly or indirectly, with Keisha, with our child, or with any member of my family forever. If you do, the next visit will not be through glass. And it will not be me. It will be someone for whom this is not personal. It is simply a job. Do you understand the terms?" Marcus nodded, unable to speak. "Good," Kenji said. He placed a single sheet of paper against the glass. It was a formal, legally worded non-contact order, already notarized. "You will sign this before your sentencing tomorrow. Your lawyer has a copy. This is the contract. We keep our contracts." Kenji stood up, hung up the phone, and left without looking back. The message was delivered. The balance was stated. The next day, Marcus signed the order and was sentenced to 5 years in a medium-security prison. The story, however, had one final, surprising twist. The saga of the slap had resonated far beyond the city. In Japan, within the upper echelons of Kenji's syndicate, his handling of the matter was noted. He had used minimal violence, maximum psychological and legal pressure, and had secured a clean, binding resolution that left no loose ends for law enforcement to pursue. He had protected the family's honor without sparking a war or unwanted police scrutiny. This was seen as masterful leadership, the modern face of Yakuza efficiency. Instead of weakening his position, it strengthened it. He was promoted within the syndicate's structure, given oversight of broader international operations. The incident, meant to be a private lesson, became a case study in controlled power. For Keisha, the closure was profound. She gave birth to a healthy baby girl, protected and loved. The systemic fear that traps so many black women facing intimate partner violence, the fear of retaliation, the lack of resources, had been nullified by the very force that terrified others. She used her security to advocate, anonymously funding shelters and legal aid groups that focus on women of color facing domestic violence. Her story, stripped of its sensational details, became a private reminder of survival. Marcus served his 5 years. Upon release, he vanished into obscurity, reportedly moving to another country, his name and his mistake forgotten by everyone except those who tell the story as a warning. The restaurant where it happened changed management and was quietly renovated, the booth where Keisha sat replaced. The final detail, the one that underscores the terrifying reach of such organizations, emerged years later. A financial journalist digging into cross-Pacific investments found a curious link. The Shell company that had purchased and exported Marcus's food truck at auction was a subsidiary of a larger corporation that did regular shipping business with Tanaka Holdings. The profit from that sale, a mere few $1,000s, was donated in the name of an anonymous donor to a nonprofit that researches perinatal health outcomes for survivors of intimate partner violence. The donation was listed in the annual report. The circle was closed with chilling precision. Every action had a reaction, every debt was accounted for, and even the spoils of the lesson were converted into a perverse form of balance. The slap in the restaurant was a moment of brutal personal violence. The response was an avalanche of impersonal, structural force. It was the collision of a man who thought with his fists and an organization that thinks in decades, in generations. The lesson was learned, the account was settled, and the world, in its own way, moved on, leaving behind only the echo of a rule as old as time. Know who you are dealing with before you raise your hand. So what are we left with after the dust settles on a story like this? On one level, it's a stark fable about power, about the chasm between impulsive violence and institutional retribution. It's a revenge fantasy that plays on a deep-seated desire to see an abuser face a consequence equal to his crime, a desire born from the grim reality that our systems often fail to provide it. But peel back the sensational layers and you find the sobering truth this story rests upon. The real horror isn't a fictional Yakuza response. The real horror is the epidemic it exploits. For nearly half of all Black women, intimate partner violence is a lifetime risk. Pregnancy, a time that should be protected, often becomes a period of heightened danger, with homicide as a leading cause of maternal death. These are not plot points, they are public health statistics. They represent a systemic failure of protection, support, and justice. The fantasy appeals because the reality is so bleak. The idea of a hidden, omnipotent force delivering perfect, brutal justice is seductive when the visible, accountable forces of law and society seem to move so slowly or not at all. It speaks to a frustration with plea deals that feel like discounts, with protections that feel like paper, with a world where survival often depends on a woman's own resources and her ability to vanish. Yet the true lesson here isn't about the power of criminal organizations. It's about the fragility of the social contracts we rely on. It's about the millions of keishas who don't have a Kenji, who navigate fear and threat with courage alone, relying on underfunded shelters, overburdened courts, and their own resilience. Their stories don't end with a neatly balanced account. They end with struggle, with healing, with the hard, daily work of rebuilding a life. The story of the slap, then, is a mirror. It shows us what we wish for when justice feels out of reach. And in that reflection, we have to ask ourselves, why is this fantasy necessary? What does it say about our world that a tale of organized crime feels, for a moment, like a satisfying answer to domestic violence? The real challenge isn't imagining a darker power to combat a private evil. It's building a society where no woman needs one. If this story, this blend of harsh reality and dark fantasy, made you think, then share it. Share it to spark a conversation about the real issues at its core. If you believe in diving deeper into the complex, often hidden forces that shape our world, then subscribe. We are just getting started. Thank you for watching.